What was the Battle of Bosworth? Was it a turning point in English history? The Battle of Bosworth, fought on August 22, 1485, was one of the most decisive engagements in English history, marking the conclusion of the Wars of the Roses and the beginning of the Tudor dynasty. This battle not only determined the fate of the English crown but also symbolized the end of the medieval period and the emergence of a more centralized monarchy. The victory of Henry Tudor over King Richard III brought an end to a prolonged civil war that had ravaged England, leading to significant political, social, and cultural changes in the country. Let us explore the background of the Wars of the Roses, the key figures involved in the Battle of Bosworth, the events of the battle itself, and its aftermath, shedding light on why this battle remains a pivotal moment in English history. Background: the Wars of the Roses. The Wars of the Roses were a series of dynastic conflicts that took place between 1455 and 1487, involving two rival branches of the royal House of Plantagenet, the House of Lancaster, represented by a red rose, and the House of York, symbolized by a white rose. These wars were driven by deep-seated rivalries within the English nobility, compounded by weak leadership and economic challenges. The root of the conflict can be traced back to the reign of King Edward III, whose numerous sons founded competing branches of the royal family, each vying for control of the throne. The initial cause of the wars was the perceived illegitimacy of the Lancastrian rule under Henry VI, a king plagued by bouts of mental illness and an inability to effectively govern the country. His ineffectiveness created a power vacuum, which Richard, Duke of York, sought to fill. Richard's claim to the throne was based on his descent from Edward III through both his parents, making him a formidable contender for the crown. His challenge to Henry VI's authority led to the outbreak of open conflict, starting with the First Battle of St. Albans in 1455. The wars saw several key battles, including the Battle of Towton in 1461, which was one of the bloodiest battles fought on English soil. Towton resulted in a decisive victory for the Yorkists, and Edward IV, Richard of York's son, ascended to the throne, bringing a temporary period of stability. However, this peace was short-lived, as internal dissent and external pressures continued to destabilize the kingdom. The death of Edward IV in 1483 reignited the conflict, particularly after his brother, Richard III, seized the throne under controversial circumstances. Richard III's rise to power was marred by the mystery surrounding the disappearance of his nephews, Edward V and Richard, Duke of York, who were imprisoned in the Tower of London and never seen again. This incident, known as the Mystery of the Princes in the Tower, cast a dark shadow over Richard's reign, leading to widespread suspicion and discontent among the nobility. It was against this backdrop of political intrigue and instability that Henry Tudor, a relatively obscure claimant to the throne with Lancastrian ties, decided to challenge Richard III's rule. Henry Tudor's claim to the throne was tenuous, based on his descent from John of Gaunt, the third son of Edward III, through an illegitimate line that had been legitimized by Parliament. Despite his weak claim, Henry was able to garner significant support from key nobles who were dissatisfied with Richard's rule, as well as financial and military backing from the French king. Henry's campaign to claim the throne culminated in the Battle of Bosworth, where the fate of the English crown would be decided. Key figures in the Battle of Bosworth. The Battle of Bosworth was not just a military engagement but a clash of personalities, each driven by ambition, loyalty, and the pursuit of power. The key figures involved in the battle played crucial roles in determining its outcome, and their actions have been immortalized in history. Richard III, the last king from the House of York, was a seasoned military leader and a skilled administrator. He had ascended to the throne in 1483 after the death of his brother, Edward IV, under circumstances that were widely regarded as dubious. Richard's reign was marked by his efforts to consolidate power and secure his position as king, but his reputation was tainted by the disappearance of the princes in the Tower, who were widely believed to have been murdered on his orders. Despite his controversial rise to power, Richard was a capable ruler with a strong following in the north of England, where he had established a power base during his brother's reign. Richard's forces at Bosworth were composed of loyal northern soldiers and mercenaries, estimated to number between 10,000 and 15,000 men. His army was well-equipped and experienced, and Richard himself was prepared to lead his troops into battle. His strategy was straightforward. He sought to overwhelm Henry Tudor's smaller and less experienced force with a direct assault, hoping to crush the rebellion before it could gain momentum. Henry Tudor, in contrast, was an outsider with a tenuous claim to the throne, having spent much of his life in exile in Brittany and France. Despite his lack of experience and his relatively small force of between 5,000 and 8,000 men, Henry was able to attract the support of several disaffected nobles and foreign allies, who saw in him a chance to restore the Lancastrian line to the throne. Henry's forces were a mix of loyal Welsh supporters, French mercenaries, and English nobles who had defected from Richard's cause. Henry's key ally was Lord Stanley, also known as Thomas Stanley, who was Henry's stepfather. Stanley's role in the battle was pivotal, as he commanded a force of around 6,000 men that could tip the balance in favor of either side. Throughout the conflict, Stanley had maintained a cautious neutrality, waiting to see which side would offer him the best advantage. His decision to support Henry at the crucial moment of the battle would prove decisive in determining the outcome. Other notable figures included John de Vere, Earl of Oxford, who was one of Henry's most trusted commanders. De Vere had been a loyal Lancastrian throughout the Wars of the Roses and had played a key role in organizing Henry's forces for the battle. His tactical acumen was instrumental in securing the victory. On Richard's side, the Duke of Norfolk was one of the king's most loyal supporters and commanded a significant portion of the royal forces. His death during the battle symbolized the collapse of Richard's cause. Each of these figures brought their own motivations, strengths, and weaknesses to the battlefield. Their actions, decisions, and betrayals were not just military maneuvers but were deeply rooted in the complex web of loyalties and enmities that characterized the Wars of the Roses. Their roles in the Battle of Bosworth would determine the fate of the English crown and the future of the kingdom. The Battle of Bosworth, Events and Strategies. The Battle of Bosworth took place on the morning of August 22, 1485, near Market Bosworth in Leicestershire. It was a decisive engagement that saw the forces of Richard III, the last king from the House of York, pitted against those of Henry Tudor, a claimant to the throne with Lancastrian ties. The battle was fought on a site that would become one of the most famous battlefields in English history, with both sides vying for control of the kingdom. Richard III commanded an army that was numerically superior to Henry's, with estimates suggesting that Richard's forces numbered between 10,000 and 15,000 men. His troops were primarily composed of northern soldiers, who were fiercely loyal to the king, as well as mercenaries hired to bolster his ranks. Richard's forces were well-equipped and experienced, reflecting his own background as a military leader who had fought in several key battles during the Wars of the Roses. Richard's strategy for the battle was based on his belief that a direct assault on Henry's forces would lead to a quick and decisive victory. He positioned his troops on Ambion Hill, a strong defensive position that gave his army the advantage of higher ground. From this vantage point, Richard intended to launch an overwhelming attack on Henry's smaller and less experienced force, crushing the rebellion before it could gain momentum. Henry Tudor's army, by contrast, was significantly smaller, with estimates ranging from 5,000 to 8,000 men. His forces were a mix of loyal Welsh supporters, French mercenaries, and English nobles who had defected from Richard's cause. Henry's strategy, developed with the advice of his commanders like the Earl of Oxford, was more cautious. Aware of his numerical disadvantage, Henry relied on the possibility of defections from Richard's camp and the strategic importance of Lord Stanley's forces, which had yet to declare for either side. As the battle commenced, Richard ordered his forces to descend from Ambion Hill and engage Henry's troops on the plain below. The initial clashes were fierce, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Richard's forces began to gain the upper hand due to their superior numbers and the effectiveness of their archers and cavalry. However, the battle's turning point came when Richard, in a bold move, decided to target Henry Tudor directly. Seeing Henry somewhat isolated with his personal guard, Richard led a charge across the battlefield, hoping to kill Henry and end the battle in one decisive blow. This move was both courageous and risky, showcasing Richard's willingness to personally lead his troops and his belief that the battle could be won by sheer force of will. As Richard's charge neared Henry's position, Lord Stanley made his crucial decision. Until this moment, Stanley and his men had remained on the sidelines, observing the battle. Stanley's loyalty had been uncertain throughout the conflict, as he had ties to both Richard and Henry. However, seeing the opportunity to decisively influence the outcome, Stanley's forces joined the battle on Henry's side, attacking Richard's flanks. This intervention was devastating for Richard's troops, who were caught off guard and quickly overwhelmed. The battle turned into a rout as Richard's forces began to collapse under the combined assault of Henry's army and Stanley's fresh troops. Richard, refusing to flee, continued to fight valiantly, even as his men deserted him. According to contemporary accounts, Richard fought bravely until he was surrounded and killed, becoming the last English king to die in battle. His death marked the end of the Plantagenet dynasty and the beginning of the Tudor era. Henry's victory at Bosworth was not just a result of superior strategy but also of Richard's miscalculations and the timely betrayal by Stanley. The battle demonstrated the volatile nature of loyalty during the Wars of the Roses and how quickly fortunes could change on the battlefield. Henry Tudor's ability to capitalize on these dynamics, combined with his strategic patience, ultimately secured his claim to the throne. Aftermath and consequences. The immediate aftermath of the Battle of Bosworth was marked by the swift coronation of Henry Tudor as Henry VII, solidifying his claim to the English throne. Richard III's death on the battlefield symbolized the end of the Plantagenet dynasty, which had ruled England for over 3 centuries. With Richard's death, the Wars of the Roses effectively came to an end, though minor uprisings and challenges to Henry's rule would continue for a few more years. Henry's first significant act as king was to marry Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Edward IV, thereby uniting the warring houses of Lancaster and York. This marriage was a strategic move designed to legitimize his reign and reconcile the factions that had been at war for decades. The union of the Red Rose of Lancaster and the White Rose of York in the Tudor Rose became a powerful symbol of this reconciliation and the new era of peace and stability that Henry sought to establish. Henry VII's reign marked the beginning of the Tudor dynasty, which would rule England for over a century. His government was characterized by efforts to centralize power and strengthen the monarchy, reducing the influence of the nobility, whose shifting loyalties had caused so much turmoil during the Wars of the Roses. Henry's policies laid the foundation for a more modern state, with a stronger central government and more effective taxation and legal systems. The consequences of the Battle of Bosworth also extended to the broader social and political landscape of England. The end of the wars allowed for a period of relative peace, which enabled economic recovery and the growth of trade. The Tudor dynasty would later oversee significant cultural and religious transformations, particularly during the reigns of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. In the long term, the Battle of Bosworth has been remembered as a defining moment in English history, representing the end of the medieval period and the beginning of the Renaissance in England. The battle and its aftermath marked a transition in governance and society, setting the stage for the emergence of England as a major European power in the centuries to come. Historiographical perspectives. The Battle of Bosworth has been the subject of extensive study and debate among historians, with interpretations evolving over time. Initially, the battle was celebrated by Tudor historians as a moment of divine providence, where the just and rightful Henry VII overthrew the tyrannical Richard III. This narrative was reinforced by popular works like Shakespeare's Richard III, which portrayed Richard as a villainous character deserving of his fate. This portrayal has had a lasting impact on how the battle and Richard's reign are perceived in popular culture. However, modern historians have re-evaluated these accounts, offering more nuanced interpretations of Richard III and the battle itself. Some scholars argue that Richard was not the monstrous figure depicted by Tudor propagandists, but rather a capable ruler whose reputation was unjustly tarnished. This reassessment has led to a more sympathetic view of Richard, highlighting his administrative reforms and his loyalty to the northern nobility. The battle itself has also been the focus of military historians who have analyzed the tactics, logistics, and decision-making processes of both sides. The role of Lord Stanley and the importance of strategic alliances have been emphasized in recent studies, showing how the outcome of the battle was far from predetermined and hinged on the complex interplay of personal ambitions and loyalties. In recent years, the discovery of Richard III's remains in 2012 and subsequent archaeological studies have provided new insights into the battle and its participants, sparking renewed public interest in this historical event. These discoveries have led to fresh debates about Richard's legacy and the true nature of the conflict that culminated at Bosworth. Overall, the historiography of the Battle of Bosworth reflects the broader complexities of interpreting historical events, where the line between fact and legend is often blurred by the passage of time and the agendas of those recording history. The Battle of Bosworth stands as one of the most significant turning points in English history. It marked the end of the Wars of the Roses, a conflict that had torn the nation apart for decades, and brought about the rise of the Tudor dynasty, which would go on to shape the future of England and its monarchy. The battle not only decided the fate of the English throne but also symbolized the end of the medieval era and the beginning of a new period of centralized power and national consolidation. The figures who fought at Bosworth, particularly Richard III and Henry Tudor, have been immortalized in history, literature, and popular culture, each representing different facets of leadership, ambition, and the quest for power. The battle's legacy continues to be a subject of fascination and debate, reflecting the enduring impact of this historical event on the collective memory of England. In conclusion, the Battle of Bosworth was more than just a military engagement. It was a decisive moment that reshaped the political landscape of England and set the stage for the modern nation-state. Its legacy, both in terms of immediate consequences and long-term historical significance, underscores its place as a key event in the annals of English history. Thanks for listening. Like and comment. And please subscribe, as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious.